Leamer has a long history of weaving spellbinding tales of true crime, all the more unsettling and compelling due to their very grounded reality. He is a longtime journalist, and his work has been widely featured, most recently in Newsweek. His book tonight should put to rest any doubts about how far some companies and CEOs will go in the name of greed. Despite disasters to individual workers and the entire townships, possibly our nation, Massey Energy continued with the unsafe practices and refused to pay their debts to their community. Their CEO going so far as to buy a seat on the West Virginia Supreme Court. As someone who spent many of my years in eastern Tennessee and in West Virginia protesting mountaintop removal, I was deeply pleased to see him examine the full extent of the damage to the communities and the inspiring story of the two lawyers who pursued an underdog court case to restore justice all the way to the Supreme Court. Please join me in welcoming tonight Laurence Leamer.
Thanks, Sam. I see there are a bunch of my buddies that I play tennis with here this evening. And they were surprised, when I invited them, they were surprised that they thought I was a novelist, that the book was nonfiction. And I said, why do you think I'm a novelist? Why are you convinced I'm a novelist? They said, because of my line calls, I thought I must have written fiction. So they changed their mind. When I wrote my book, The Kennedy Men, I spent a lot of time at the Library of Congress. And I spent one day reading an 800-page history of the 380 Harvard men who died in World War I. And as I read it, I can't tell you how moved I was by it. Here was one young man who was a writer, and you knew that if he had lived, he might well have stood between Fitzgerald and Hemingway. And here's another young man who was interested in science. You know that he would have become a researcher and what advance he might have made to curing cancer. Here was somebody else who was interested in politics. With such an extraordinary background, he would have probably become a senator, maybe he would have become a president. Each one of those young men were really the best of their generation. It's the bravest that get up and fight and go forward. Any histories of war show that the average soldier never fires his weapon. The average soldier just hunkers down in the bunker and doesn't get up and doesn't go forward. And when he does go forward, doesn't even fire the weapon. Our society, it always has been dependent, always will, on people that have the guts to stand up and go out in the face of fire, even if their comrades fall, go forward. Without that, society is just a greedy, selfish anarchy. And so that's what this book is about. It's about people who stood up under the most difficult of circumstances. My mother is 95 years old. My mother's a great reader. She was a lousy cook, in part because when she was cooking, she'd have one hand cooking and she'd be reading a book with the other hand. Okay, and she read all the time. Serious books. When she was 93, she was reading this book about Bonhoeffer, the Protestant theologian who died in World War II because he was an anti-Nazi and was executed. And, you always want your mother's love. Even I'm 71, but you have to have your mother's love. And you don't know how long she's going to live. So last year, I took my manuscript and printed it out and gave it to her to read. And every time I come to see her, she didn't read it. I didn't dare say too much, but I was really hurt by that. And finally, after about 6 months, I realized my mother, I'm going to get upset. My mother couldn't read anymore. She couldn't read books anymore, okay? She couldn't read my book, and I was really upset. But I understood it. It was so sad for my mother. And then of course, I gave my mother my book. And 3 days later, I called my mother. My mother read the book. Somehow she managed to read this book. It was that important to her. And she said, Larry, this is the best book you've ever written. I've read all your books. This is the best. In all the despair that's in American society now, here are people that stand up. That's what we need in this country, and that's what we need in the world. So that's what this book is about. When I was a young man, I went down and worked in a coal mine in West Virginia. For some reason, I was fascinated by that part of the world. I don't even understand it now. But I went down there and got a job and worked in a coal mine. And I worked for 3 months, and I wrote an article for Harper's Magazine about it. And I didn't write it in the first person. You read that article, you don't even know I was there. Because I thought, who am I? I'm there for 3 months. This is what these men do their entire lives. And our entire industrial society was based on these men. Where would we be? Our lights, we would have no lights. We would not have the metallurgical coal that makes coke, that makes steel, that builds our great buildings. These miners are responsible for that. Over 100,000 men have died in those coal mines. There more than have died in Vietnam and the Korean War together. But there's no monument on the wall on the mall to these men. And they are largely forgotten then, and they're largely forgotten now. In West Virginia, only an hour away from us, is another world that is dismissed. The terrible things that are going on there, as Hannah was talking about before, including mountaintop removal, we don't pay too much attention to that. The national media doesn't pay too much attention. But I, 2.5 years ago, read this story in the New York Times about this guy, Hugh Caperton, who owned a small coal mine in Virginia, and how Don Blankenship, the CEO of Massey Energy, the biggest coal company in Appalachia, had destroyed his company. And how he had gotten these two lawyers, Bruce Stanley and Dave Fawcett, to take this case on a contingency basis. They had taken it in the West Virginia courts. They had won a $50 million verdict. And Blankenship had gone on, and he basically purchased the West Virginia Supreme Court. One of the judges he won elected, he spent $3 million, the most money anyone has ever spent in a judicial election, to elect Brent Benjamin, who then went and voted Blankenship's way, a crucial vote, and turned back what was now a $70 million judgment. Another of the justices was Blankenship's old-time buddy, and previously, Blankenship, while this was being decided in the Supreme Court, the two of them were off in Europe together with their mistresses. When this surfaced and these pictures surfaced, he had to recuse himself, but the court, a second time, still turned this down. This case reached the United States Supreme Court. And Ted Olson, the conservative appellate judge, took this case, this progressive argument that you can't spend all this money you can't have justice if one person could spend that kind of money to buy a justice. And Olson argued this before the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, said, no, you can't do that. You can't spend $3 million. They didn't say the dollar amount, but they said you can't do this. And so once again, the case went back to the West Virginia Supreme Court, and once again, it was turned down by this unbelievably corrupt court. I know this in part because one of the justices, Larry Starcher, became my source. Not only became my source, but he gave me his private diary. So I know, for example, the first time the case was decided, when the court case was being heard, Elliot Maynard, who was one of Blankenship's friends, he was one of the 5 justices. When the attorneys for Caperton got up to argue their case, Maynard got up and walked out. Didn't come back until these guys were finished with their arguments. The next day they went in to decide this case. They decided and turned this $50 million judgment back in 60 seconds. They sat around that table and turned it back. They didn't even give a reason. They figured out the reason afterwards. We're going to turn this thing down. Afterwards, we're going to figure out the reason we're turning this down. That's how corrupt this court is. And that's what these two men, that's what they fought for all these years. And they got into it. They're very different people. Different. Bruce is short. He hates to be called fat, but he is fat. He's short and fat. And he comes from a very poor family in West Virginia. He had a home without indoor plumbing, suffered a lot from his background, went to the University of West Virginia, went there as an undergraduate, then came down to Williamson and worked for the Williamson Daily News, and was there in 1985 with the big UMW strike, the biggest strike in the whole history of the union, where Don Blankenship was the president of the subsidiary there. And that was when Don Blankenship began to destroy the union. The union, when I was working there, I thought that it would last forever. Nobody would destroy this union. Well, Don Blankenship set it on its way, and the union is destroyed now. It's mainly kind of retirees and disabled, but it's no longer a force in the coal fields any longer. And that's what Blankenship was able to do. And Bruce saw this, He saw the corruption in Mingo County. He saw it was almost impossible to get justice, and he wanted out of there. So he didn't want to become a journalist anymore. He decided he wanted to become a lawyer. And he went to Pittsburgh and becomes a lawyer. And when he has an opportunity to do this case, he originally doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to go back into this cesspool. He doesn't want to do it again. But he's drawn to it because he loves West Virginia. He loves the people. So he goes back and he takes this case. His partner, Dave Fawcett, the most unlikely couple imaginable. Fawcett is this tall, elegant, beautifully dressed man. He's a third-generation Pittsburgh lawyer. He's very meticulous. He is considered to be slow like a whale. That's what he likes that he's slow as a whale. Everything has to be prepared. When he gets before a jury, he has to know what questions he's going to ask. He's totally not spontaneous at all. Bruce is the opposite. Bruce is flying by the seat of your pants. Bruce is brilliant and quick. He makes mistakes because he's maybe overconfident. But can imagine the two of these guys working together all these years and the difficulties they had working together. But they were on this quest together, and nothing was going to stop them. Dave had two other lawsuits involving Massey. The Wheeling Pitt Steel Company in Wheeling in western Pennsylvania was one of the last steel companies in America. And they had a contract with Massey to supply the coal. Now, coal has to come regularly because with coke ovens have to be hot all the time. If they cool off, coke ovens are destroyed. And so they had this contract for $30 million worth of coal every year. And suddenly Massey starts not sending the coal. And they're making all these kinds of excuses. But the reality was that they could make 3 times as much money selling this coal overseas. So they stiffed this local company, stiffed these 3,000 union men who when it went bankrupt, lost their jobs. Blankenship didn't care, okay? Because for Blankenship, everything is the bottom line, that all that matters is the bottom line. Does he care about the sense of community, how he's destroying this company? He didn't care. So Fawcett took this case and won. He won a $220 million verdict for this company. You'd think that would stop, but they were still making coke. They weren't making steel, but they were still making coke and selling the coke. Blankenship once again started stiffing them on their contract for coal. And Fawcett once again sued them and once again won an undisclosed amount, but it's probably close to $100 million. But Blankenship's thinking is, okay, I'll pay these legal. This is just legal costs. I'm making so much money from this. Yeah, I'll have to pay the lawyers this. It doesn't matter. Bruce had several other cases involving Massey that went to the heart and soul of what Massey is and what Blankenship is. In 2006, the Aracoma mine, there was a fire in the Aracoma mine, and 2 miners died. And Bruce took on their representation. And one of the widows, Dolores Bragg, Bruce cares about that more than any other case he's ever had, more than Caperton, more than anything. And Dolores was this nurse. She was a very private person. She knew nothing about coal. And Blankenship and Massey tried to kind of bribe her. She had 2 sons. And they said, we'll take the sons. You can come and sit at the owner's box at the Pittsburgh Steelers football game. And so she accepted, but she wouldn't sign. And she knew she needed an outside lawyer because most of the lawyers in West Virginia are in the cahoots with this whole system. And they needed somebody, they needed a Bruce Stanley. And Bruce Stanley took this and fought it, and it went to trial. And it was the most devastating testimony to see what Massey was doing. They were faking, there were supposed to be these safety tests, these safety drills. They signed that they had this, and they didn't have them. There were the hoses, the fire hoses, that didn't work. There was no water for safety. The ventilation system went backwards. And Blankenship didn't care because he just pushed people to work harder and harder. One of the miners testified that he had to work 35 days straight, 12 hours a day, often in water up to his knees and above. If that had been a union mine in the old days, they would have walked a long time ago. But those days are finished, and people so desperately need work that they're forced to keep up with this. But Stanley won that case. But that wasn't enough for Stanley. Stanley knew that the federal mine inspectors, he thought they were on the take. He was convinced they were on the take. And if they were on the take, they were so incompetent they deserved to be punished for that. So Stanley has gone on and sued the federal government for this. It's almost unheard of to do this, and he's gotten very, very, very far with this. The Virginia federal court said he could go ahead with this, so he's done this. He also then, in Blankenship, then with Aracoma, they paid $3 million in fines, which to Blankenship is just pin money. Blankenship was making $25 million a year, and for Massey, the massive amounts of profits it makes, so we'll pay $3 million in fines. So what? And part of the settlement was that there be no criminal charges against any of the Massey executives for these egregious things they did in this mine. So Massey didn't change. 4 years later, the Upper Big Branch mine blew up. 29 miners died. It is a replica of what happened 4 years ago. The same problems, the same misconduct. It is just stunning. And it is just tragic that nothing was done. Nothing was done. And then Bruce took on the case of the mother and the sister and the brother of one of these 29 miners. Now, that's unheard of. Again, you don't, maybe the siblings and the widows and the spouse, the aggrieved spouse, you can sue and you get money for that. But Bruce didn't care. And Bruce is so tough and so relentless that he got a big settlement for them. And he's just going on. I mean, he is convinced that his great goal in life is to bring down Blankenship. And with Upper Big Branch, for the first time in the history of West Virginia coal industry in 140 years, Booth Goodwin, the U.S. attorney, whose father was a federal judge, has gone after Massey systematically. He started with the lower levels. He's worked his way up. He's gotten criminal charges, convictions against 4 of these men. The last one, and in none of this was Blankenship's name even mentioned. People are afraid of him. People aren't going to even stare his name. And people that live in West Virginia think it's inconceivable that Blankenship could be convicted. It's just the top guys, no matter what they do, they get away. That's just the way the system works. But Goodwin has continued and has been just relentless. In the last conviction, the judge asked that they were asking about when the mine inspectors came. You're not supposed to tell before the mine inspectors are coming because you can fix things up beforehand. It's a federal crime to do that. But systematically in those Massey mines, they were told beforehand the inspectors were there. And he was pleading guilty for this and was going to spend several years in prison. And he asked, who told you this? And he said, the CEO. He didn't even dare say his name, but the CEO is Don Blankenship. Now, I have great sources on this. And a year ago, I said, he's going to be convicted. And my friends in West Virginia said, you got to be kidding, Larry. You don't know this. You don't know the system. You don't know how it works. There's no way he's going to be convicted. He's going to be convicted. Well, I'm telling you this. I have great contacts about this. Within the next 4 to 6 weeks, I'm almost certain, unless something dramatic happens, not only is he going to be indicted, but he is going to be indicted under charges of such severity that it'll be mind-boggling. It will be a national story. For the first time in a long time, people will once again be paying attention to West Virginia. And West Virginians will be able to stand tall and know finally there's some justice in their state. And it'll be in part because Bruce Stanley and Dave Fawcett for 14 years fought, often alone against incredible odds. They went forward, and this will be their victory. It'll be Goodwin's victory. It'll be a victory for West Virginia. It'll be a victory for justice. It'll be a victory for all of us. Thank you.
Do you have a sense of how the bad guys in the story are reacting? And in the process of these events unfolding, does the existence of a free press, First Amendment, books like yours, make much difference?
Well, okay, one of the heroes of the book is the New York Times. The New York Times was down there very early doing stories that nobody else was doing. They did a magnificent job early on. they when the Supreme Court was going to hear the Caperton case, and you need four votes. You only need 4 votes for the Supreme Court to hear something, and they couldn't get the 4 votes. It went on for 4 weeks, and at the 4th week, Dorothy Samuels, who's on the editorial board of the New York Times, she learned about this, and she wrote an editorial, sort of telling the court that it really should hear this. And the next week they decided to hear it. So the Times has been great. Unfortunately, and one of the tragedies of American journalism is the inevitable downsiding for financial reasons. For a whole year, there's not been a Mid-Atlantic reporter who covers that whole region of the country. They're just doing it on stringers. Now they have somebody. But the one story he's done in 4 months is on the Hatfield and McCoy feud, okay? That's the story. When there's so many, I can't tell you how many great stories there are that deserve to be done. So, free press. How do they react down there? I know that the West Virginia Supreme Court once a year goes up to the University of West Virginia, and they have their hearings up there. And it's not as private as at other places. And somebody heard the court before the session for a half hour, and all they were talking about was this book, and how upset they were about it, and how embarrassing it was. And then, I should have mentioned this before about the Caperton case. It was turned down, after it was turned down in West Virginia, after all these years, they filed it again in Virginia. And the Virginia Circuit Court turned it down. And so they took it to the Virginia Supreme Court. And I thought, it's a conservative court. They're not going to let this trial go ahead. But they decided unanimously that this trial deserves to go ahead. And it reminds me, I was at a co-hosted a dinner party for Andrew Young, great Andrew Young, a couple months ago. And somebody got up and said, "Oh, we're all Democrats here, rah, rah, rah." And he said, "You know what? In the civil rights movement," he said, "it's pitching on the Selma March. It was the Republican judges that saved us. Once we got into their areas, we're okay." Now, they didn't do that. Maybe they didn't care about integration. Maybe they were opposed to integration, but they cared about the law. And these conservative judges in Virginia, have written this brilliant 27-page document detailing what is going on. So that case now is going to go to trial. I just got a few emails today from Bruce and Dave and about what's going to be happening on this book. I've gotten the best reviews of my career. The reviews have been unbelievable. But they think it's about to stop because they think that they're going to be coming back to get us. And next week I'm going to Pittsburgh, and then I'm going down to West Virginia. Dave's not going down with us. He doesn't want to go down. But Bruce and I are going down and confronting this world. There's so many good people. There's so many people there that know what's wrong, but they are not in positions of power. The politicians are corrupt, or if they're not corrupt, they're cowardly. When do people speak the truth in West Virginia? They speak the truth when they're about to die or when they're retiring. When did Senator Robert Byrd speak truthfully about the coal industry? Now, I'm not speaking negative, terrible things about the coal industry. A realistic portrait of the coal industry. He did it 2 months before he died. A few months ago, Senator Jay Rockefeller got up on the floor of the United States Senate and made a similar talk. I knew when he made that talk that he'd be retiring because they would be out to get him. He wouldn't be reelected because they're just trying to destroy you. And remember when Gore lost the election to George W. Bush, we talk about Florida. You can equally talk about West Virginia. It was those 5 votes. And West Virginia was as solid a Democratic state as you wanted. But Big Coal and the Republican Party got together in West Virginia, and they created this image of Gore as being this vicious, anti-coal, pro-environmentalist. And you can't speak the truth. The reality is that coal is in trouble in West Virginia, not because of the environmentalists, not because of Obama, not because of overregulation. It's because the seams are played out. It's because there's cheaper, natural gas is cheap. It has nothing to do with this. And sooner or later, they're going to have to find a different way to make a living, and a new generation of politician is going to have to get up and speak truthfully. But it'll be for the first time.
Tennis partners, will you please take security down to West Virginia
Okay.
with you? They don't want to lose you as a player.
Okay.
What about the judges in this instance? Are there any cases that can be brought up with regard to their malfeasance in office?
Well, these judges are. What can be done about them? I mean, Spike Maynard, the one who went to Europe with Blankenship, he was voted out of office. So but he still is doing court cases, circuit court cases. But they aren't going to touch them. I mean, judges are rarely touched. Okay, it just doesn't happen. And Justice Davis probably is the worst example. Her husband Scott Siegel is the trial lawyer, the biggest trial lawyer in the state. He's made hundreds of millions of dollars. They live in the biggest house in West Virginia, probably. It's 20,000 square feet. And when I interviewed him about the house, he said that I built this house for union workers. Okay? He said, I have had these union cases, and this house is a monument to the unions. Well, you know what? I don't see too many union workers living there.
Based on what you learned writing this book, do you think unions will ever come back in this country?
You know, boy, I understand the excess of unions at times. I understand the corruption of the UMW. The UMW grew corrupt in some ways. But what else do you have if you don't have a union? Blankenship has this idea. It's basically a fascist idea. I'm not saying he's a fascist, but it's an idea that Mussolini had, that the people and the workers and we all work together in one big group. It doesn't work. These miners, they need protection. They've been manipulated out of the union. I think it'll come back in some form. I mean, these workers just need protection. That's all there is to it. Now, admittedly, what happens with the younger guys? And I know because when I was in that union, it's the old guys that go to the union meetings. Young guys don't go. They're at the bar or whatever. The young guys, you can make a couple dollars extra an hour in a non-union mine. You're not going to get retirement. You're not going to get the health benefits. But when you're 25 years old, you don't care. You don't see down the road what's going to happen. But sometimes you don't even get that. Now, the Patriot Coal Company was spun off a few years ago from a larger company, and all these union obligations were put on it, and it has declared bankruptcy. And these thousands and thousands of miners now are left without this and just bereft. That is a great national story. It should be on the front page of the New York Times. Unfortunately, it's not.
Paul Friedman from Alexandria, Virginia, and as a fellow tennis player, let me serve this question to you. What do you think you've learned in regard to lawyers and to cases like these, beyond just this one case? There's been a movement in America, a conservative movement, to cap the amount of money people can get in lawsuits, to go after the trial lawyers in general, to prevent class action suits, whole range of ways that corporate America has been trying to prevent people from going to trial, to hold them accountable, even by making so many people be held to contracts that they sign if they are employed, where they have to go to to dispute resolution situations that favor them, and they can't go to lawyers. So, from your experience in this case, can you extrapolate and talk about what you think of the legal system we have, and whether we're even losing a legal system that can defend our interests in this country?
Well, it's indispensable. I mean, look, the trial lawyers make a lot of money. That's real in these contingency cases. Sometimes they make millions of dollars. That's the way the system makes. And if you get a contingency lawyer, you always think he's overpaid. That's the way it is. But where would we be without this in these cases? Who's going to fight this battle? And I think it's indispensable. And I think these corporations very, very smartly are trying to, have this onus on the trial lawyers. But I have such respect for some lawyers. I have respect for Reed Smith. Okay, it was the firm where these two guys work. It's a 130-year-old firm. Reed Smith was the Carnegie lawyer. Okay, this isn't Ralph Nader's firm, but yet they took this on contingency. They are $6 million into this. $6 million, okay? They've been steadfast. Most law firms in America wouldn't have done this. In many firms, you would have had a bunch of partners going in to see the general partner and say, look, we're billing, we're working hard. These guys down the hall are just draining our firm. We can't go on like this. That didn't happen. And they're very proud of this. And Greg Jordan, who's the managing partner, he's so proud of this book. He's so proud of these guys. He's giving a big party in Reed Smith next Wednesday evening. He just wants to celebrate this and believes in it. And I think the whole firm deserves to be celebrated for keeping this up. So I think it's just important. It's just important, this kind of law. Without it, I don't think we'd have an American democracy as we know it.
But I followed Blankenship, and it must be in the Times, the Post, or the Wall Street Journal for a number of years. And I could see what, it's very clear what the guy was doing. And a little sidelight, just recently, I think Arch Coal has tried to relocate to Denver so they can drop all the benefits of the workers. Why, at this point in time, I mean, John L. Lewis is long gone and all that, was Blankenship able to do this? In other words, these extraordinary business practices and get away with it totally. I mean, the press really was covering it, and he's been incredibly destructive, as you point out over and over again, to the people of West Virginia. Why in the last 20, 30 years was this kind of greed unable to be stopped?
Well,
in a dying industry.
Yeah, it was. In other words, he's the most powerful coal baron in American history at a time that the coal industry is going down the hill, okay? And he came in just at that time. He's a poor boy. He's an illegitimate boy. His mother ran a little grocery store. He worked his way. He worked in a coal mine. He worked his way through college. He worked summers in a coal mine. Took off one year and worked in a coal mine. And he's the only person in that industry almost ever who lives in West Virginia. He lives in a mine superintendent's house, his main house, or not anymore, but it was for most of these years, in southern West Virginia. Okay, he loves, in his way, he loves the state. He thinks he's a patriot. He thinks that the union is evil. He thinks traditional corporations are evil. He thinks, well, for the people on the dole there, we've got to end all that. He's a true believer. In his way, he's a brilliant man because he understands the mentality. And he kind of bought his way. He wasn't cheap. It wasn't just the $3 million that he paid out of his own pocket to elect this justice. That was his own money he paid. He gave millions of dollars to the political system. That's the way he is. I mean, he really tried to change things in his way. He's a very shrewd man. And nobody dares speak against him. Because that's the way the place is. It's like another country in that way, that people don't dare speak out. The press, when the one sort of progressive voice in the state, the Charleston Gazette, when he got angry at them, he sued them, for libel, and they shut up for over a year. He shut them up. He just was a powerful influence. And if it hadn't been for the Upper Big Branch disaster, and even with those 29 deaths, if Bruce Stanley wasn't able to tell the media and relate what happened at Upper Big Branch with what happened 4 years ago at Aracoma, Don Blankenship would still be standing there. I mean, Bruce Stanley is a crucial person. He's a very shrewd man. What he understands as a lawyer, which many lawyers don't understand, is the use of the media, that there's a synergy between the law and the media. Even when you read the Supreme Court briefs, that they did, they're quoting articles in the newspapers that somehow the lawyers have instigated these articles, and then they quote what they want to have in there, okay? So that's how it worked. That's how it worked together.
Briefly, is there anything in the way of outstanding civil litigation against Blankenship at this point?
Personally, there's nothing. There are things where he's named, but nothing. I mean, listen, he's moved on. Now it's going to be a criminal indictment.
So, in other words, anything that would be forthcoming would be of a criminal nature as opposed to civil?
There's things that aren't that crucial. He got so much money. He walked away with $70 million. That was his package when he walked away. Imagine. He was making more money a year than the profits of the entire company by a long shot.
I think Massey was merged, either went belly up.
Yeah,
or
no,
Massey
was sold. See, that was his dream. Was Massey Energy. That's all he cared about. He's not greedy for money. He's greedy for power. Okay. And Massey, with the 29 deaths and all the bad publicity that came down on him, they then sold it to Alpha, and he had to retire. But again, if not for Bruce Stanley, he'd still be standing there.
Hi, Martin Hindle. I'm a local attorney and I guess interested citizen. Thanks so much for your book. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
I was curious. I listened to your setup, and it sounded like you mentioned that you got some very, very inside information from one of the West Virginia Supreme Court justices. And if I heard that right, can you elaborate? Like, how did you gain that person's trust and get all that inner information?
I'm just very sneaky.
So
no, I don't know.
I mean, that's very unusual.
No, not only that. I have his personal diary. So I have a diary of everything that went on, the crucial things that went on in the court. I have the diary that he wrote down that day.
This is a sitting justice?
Now he's retired.
Okay.
But I talked to him, and I was worried. You're always worried who's going to be upset, okay, with the book. The extraordinary thing is the people you think are going to be upset, they're not upset. There's somebody you think you've written a Valentine to them. They're the ones that threaten to sue you. That's just the way it is, okay? And Larry Starcher, I was very worried that he would be livid at this, okay? He gave me this, but then it's one thing to give it and then to see it in print, okay? And he's still a judge. He's retired, but he makes good money as an added circuit judge, okay? And he loves doing that. And that could be in jeopardy because of this. But boy, he's had no problem. And his wife has no problem. She loves the book. And Wednesday evening in Pittsburgh, he's going to be there. So he's okay with it.
Can you talk about campaign finance reform when it comes to judicial activities? We know in Texas, I believe, and West Virginia, people can buy these appointments by providing the campaign financing out of your own pocket to get people elected. So not every place judges are elected.
No. And in very few countries. Switzerland, and I forget one other country. Most of the world, why would you elect a judge? It doesn't make any sense. And when you give a lot of money to elect a judge, what are you paying your money for? Is it to have some independent person who's going to decide, or is it somebody who thinks your way and is going to vote your way? We know the answer to that. So the irony is this: is that Ted Olson, who okay, so I confess I'm a Democrat. So when George W. won, and Ted Olson, argued Gore v. Bush in the Supreme Court, he's not exactly on my good guy list. So, but I got to know him doing this book, and I just had the greatest respect for this guy. Although, here's the irony. He takes this case, and he changes the law in terms of judicial elections. They don't say the money, the dollar amount, but you can no longer spend massive amounts of money. At the same time, he had Citizens United, okay, now which ended up saying that you can basically there are no rules. The corporation is a person, and there are no limits. Now, what one has to remember is that Citizens United was a very narrow case originally. It was about this movie about Hillary, this documentary, and when could it be shown before the election. That was the narrow case. And the justices said, hey, they wanted to make a broader decision. So they asked for the case to be re-argued. I've never asked Ted Olson this. I bet you anything, he's not as happy with this as he pretends to be. Because we see the result that this has had. We see the terrible impact that kind of money has had on American society. And sooner or later, and here are the two bookends. Okay, we have Caperton, which says there's a limited amount of money in judicial elections, and you have Citizens United that says in the rest of the elections you can get whatever you want. And everybody's buying into it. Even President Obama is buying into it, right? I mean, that's what you have to drink the Kool-Aid to become reelected. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you. Thank you.